Yo, what's up? Back at you with another video. In light of Trump and his tariffs and the Fafos busy sending threats our way, we've had an ally, Dan Corder. You remember when he was on DJ Spoo's The Hustler's Corner, he referred to some group of people as grifters, charlatans, white idiots.
I mean, I'm sure you saw that one TV show of mine went viral when I just took on all of these white idiots online. Like, the Kifnis and Roland Skuman and Ilan and all these people, the 142 race laws.
And some of them, he just straight up called them fuckers.
So these fuckers could have called them 142 sex laws.
Bro.
Or 142 able laws.
Yes.
Because that's also what it said. But they don't have a problem with the others.
And so we're here now to listen to the other side of the Fafos and what they normally bring. We're going to be hearing about the Trump tariffs. His video is called Trump Caves, South Africa Tariffs Down to 10%. The Corder Report. Let's go.
And the biggest South African news today is that Orlando Pirates qualified through their quarterfinal to the African Champions League, the CAF Champions League semi-finals. Up the Bucks, once always Buccaneer. That's actually not the biggest news story of the day. No, the biggest news stories that we're going to be addressing today are firstly, the demented Nazi, the evil knick-knack, the fascist frito, whatever you want to call him from the nicknames we've come up with, Donald Trump caved. I know that people are also saying now that it was also insider trading. Both things then can be true. And we're going to talk about how Donald Trump caving on the tariffs to everybody except China, what that means for South Africa, everyday citizens, and for some of our industries that are going to be most affected by tariffs from the United States. And we're also going to talk about the ongoing shenanigans around the VAT budget, because last night the ANC and ActionSA had a meeting. They both came out with statements saying that they will do their darndest. They will do their absolute best to try and find alternatives to a VAT increase that otherwise is coming on the 1st of May. And for those of you in the comments who've been wanting longer shows every single day, you should know that you can get the full long shows on podcast on Spotify and Apple. We post about half the show on YouTube, but at the same time we post full shows on the podcast streamers. Find us there. Okay, so this morning, South Africa time, as the US markets crumbled, as the world economy shook, and as everything was getting worse and tending towards recession, Donald Trump abandoned. He caved on his tariffs. Now, what does this actually mean? It means that for all of those countries in the world, including South Africa and Lesotho and Cambodia and Vietnam and all these different countries in the world, he dropped the tariff rates to the lowest rate of 10% that he put on some countries in the world in his initial list of tariffs. He caved. He absolutely caved. We're going to talk about the potential for insider trading in a second, but I do not believe that was his grand master plan the whole way through. It is also incredibly funny to think about the fact that he caved on tariffs to the Heard and McDonald's Islands, the penguins. Outsmarted.
Which I'm pretty sure are one of the countries that did not line up, allegedly, to negotiate.
Because one of Trump's massive claims now is that 75 countries came begging and kissing his ass to the table to try and get some kind of deal done. Interestingly, Trump's administration will not release any evidence or even a list of the alleged 75 countries who apparently came begging and pleading. I have enjoyed in the last few hours imagining how it would have gone if the penguins from Madagascar went in for a negotiation with Trump. I think they would win. And hilariously, the penguins from the McDonald and Heard Islands basically took the Madagascar penguins' idea of smile and wave, boys. Just smile and wave.
It's true.
And it worked.
There might be some undercover explosive experts in that team.
100%. So the funny thing now is people have been trying, MAGA people, deluded people have been trying to spin this as Trump's master plan all along. There is so much evidence to suggest that this is not the case. Let's just start with the fact that Trump came out, and I'm actually going to read you the direct quotes from the first news media interviews with him. So he came out and said that the tariffs for everyone but China will drop to 10%. And he said, I thought people were jumping a bit of line. They were getting a little bit yippy. That was his hot take on the market meltdown around the world, basically saying we don't trust you and you're hammering America and the world economy. And then he went on to say, when asked why, literally the day before there would be no pause on tariffs, his administration said that. Literally the day before he said they would be permanent. He said, you have to have flexibility. I could say, here's a wall and I'm going to go through it, and you can't go through the wall. Sometimes you have to be able to go under the wall or around the wall or over the wall.
Doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in his whole plan to encircle America with a wall.
He's certainly not building the wall. Brilliant, Eric. That's amazing. If your drunk granddad at Christmas said, you have to have flexibility, I could say, here's a wall, I'm going to go through it, and you can't go through the wall. Sometimes you have to be able to go under the wall, around the wall, over the wall. You would say, bedtime. You would literally say, go to sleep, granddad. You've had enough whiskey. Okay, so let's look at this, right? Over the last week, Trump and his people and all the MAGA influencers have tried to say that the short-term pain and suffering that Americans are going through is worth the long-term restructuring of the world economic order to bring American jobs back to America, or to bring jobs that have gone overseas back to America, to strengthen American local businesses, and to create a manufacturing industrial boom, to have factories opened all across America. That's what they said for the last week, to try and kind of sugarcoat the destruction of American quality of life that these tariffs were doing. Extraordinarily, I saw one MAGA influencer saying, money is just money. You don't need money. Life is actually about happiness. You don't need money. Like, to try and persuade.
The coping mechanisms were crazy.
All of these Trump MAGA voters who are now losing their retirement, losing their pensions, their small businesses were being hammered. By the way, most American small businesses are going to stay hammered by this because they import from China and then sell at a markup rate. That Chinese trade war with over 100% tariffs in both directions is still happening, right? So I frankly do not believe that this was Trump's plan all along, even though there's now evidence of insider trading towards, his friends, the billionaires, in the last 24 hours. We'll get to that in a second. Because I do think it's possible that they did insider trading, but I also just believe that this went so much worse than they thought it would. Because generally what happens when the stock markets go down is two things rally. The American dollar rallies because people go, okay, safe bet, the dollar. The American dollar strengthens when the American stock markets go down. And the other thing that generally strengthens is United States Treasury bonds, which is essentially purchases that different companies and countries have made on the US's bonds so that the US can use that money to spend on interest and future payments back. But this time, it was so bad that the stock markets went down and the dollar went down. And then the bonds went down. That is a catastrophic economic collapse inbound. And the other thing that Trump said, one of the first things he said to the media after he announced the tariffs would go down to 10% across the board, except for China, is he said, I was looking at the bond market. He admitted it. And even Fox News' in-house business people are saying, I'd love to say that he didn't capitulate, but he absolutely did. So this is a beautiful day. I'm having a great time with this news because it's good for South Africa, it's good for the world economy, and it's good for seeing Trump exposed as the lunatic idiot that he is. But now people are talking about insider trading. Now, if you don't know what insider trading is, it is illegal. But essentially, in a stock market, no one is allowed by law to have information about something that affects stocks. They're not allowed to get that information before that something happens. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because that gives them an unfair advantage over everybody else in the stock market. If they know, for example, with Steinhoff, that Steinhoff is about to collapse, that the CEO is about to resign, they're about to declare bankruptcy, if they know that before the time, they can sell their stocks before the announcement. So then the stocks collapse, but they avoid the collapse. It's unfair on everybody else. So that is what I think is most likely, based on all their messaging in the last week, because you realize now that they've sold the dream to everyday Americans that this suffering is worth it, all the suffering that they felt is worth it, and now they've just abandoned that without being able to say, look at all these trade deals we've signed that are actually going to be better for you. No. That is too damaging. They would not have done that from the start, thinking this would happen just to try and get some kind of insider trading, mass fleecing of the American economy. I just don't believe that. So what does this mean for South Africa? Well, it means strictly, of course, that the 30% tariff that we were going to have now drops to 10%. We spoke to Rob Rose on Monday on the TV show. He's this top financial analyst. He actually wrote Steinheist. Like, he's really, really good. And he and I spoke about the fact that there are specific industries that are going to particularly be hammered by these tariffs because there are large South African export industries that are geared towards selling to Americans. So it's not the whole farming industry, but it is the citrus industry, controversial from last week's show when we speculated about grapes. Citrus is things with a rind, apparently. And ironically, it's actually grapefruit, but not grapes. That's the best I can defend myself for speculating about grapes. But it's fair enough, also the lemons and the oranges.
For sure.
And the nachos, probably.
No doubt.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'm not going to get in trouble with you again about that. But it's still not good that there's now 10% tariffs. But it's way better. It's 2/3 better than at 10% than 30%. Also macadamia nuts and other kinds of nuts. But remember, you would have noticed, maybe if you follow stocks in the last week, that the Joburg Stock Exchange has actually, it's been bad. It's gone down as part of a global downturn across the world, but it's not been as bad as the world's major economies. And that's actually because South African business is far more resilient or impervious to American action than I think many of us thought. We've got a far more diversified economic outlook than many knew, but we still need to have far more, right? Because Trump is now saying this is going to be a stay on tariffs for 90 days. And so they might come back in 90 days. I just don't think that they will. It seems very unlikely that they will, but they could. But even if they don't, it's still 10% tariffs, right? So we need to try and diversify our economic exports in things like citrus and things like nut farming. We're not going to take that out of context, Eric. It is nut farming. It's macadamia nut farming.
Look, as long as you don't get into peanuts, because, like, apart from my own allergy, I read a hypothesis once that it's actually not a nut and it's a legume. But we weren't going to
now you're going to annoy even more people.
I'm sorry.
We can't keep getting into this. First, it was footloose in the grapes. We can't do this. Okay, so that's the big story of today as we wait and see what mad shenanigans Trump is going to do next. But if anybody is trying to tell you this was a master plan of inside trading from the beginning, I don't think so. But a more recent, in the last few days, plan when they saw the economic fall apart and Trump tweeted, "Be cool," all caps. Like some kind of high school, rugby player or something.
Sounds like you just had a mug that said "Keep calm and carry on."
Yeah. Be cool. Ridiculous. Anyway, so all of that has happened, and we'll see how it unfolds in South Africa. But it is definitely good for some of our industries. Okay, let's now talk about the other story, which is this. We need to talk about what this means because I don't know what it means yet. But last night, the ANC and ActionSA tweeted these announcements after a meeting that they had. It's interesting to put them side by side and see how they each portrayed this. So ActionSA put out a press statement saying, ActionSA concludes productive meeting with the ANC over budget crisis. The meeting addressed a number of realities pertaining to the challenging fiscal environment. Key to this discussion was a clear mutual commitment to ensure revenue alternatives are tabled that will identify alternatives to the VAT increase. In this regard, both parties are unequivocally committed to this process to shield South Africans from any increase before 1 May 2025. Strong language from ActionSA, but even they could only say, ensure revenue alternatives are tabled to identify alternatives to VAT. They were not guaranteeing that there's going to be no VAT increase.
And I feel like that's what we've seen from the beginning, is just this idea of like entertaining the conversation.
That's what you said.
Tabling the idea. We don't have any like firm commitments. And nothing is binding, as we said.
Totally. Let's compare it to what the ANC says. So they just say, statement on the meeting with ActionSA to address the national budget impasse. They say the meeting was frank and cordial. It reflected a shared recognition of the urgency required to resolve the current budget impasse in a manner that safeguards service delivery, upholds the principles of sound fiscal governance, and protects the most vulnerable from any unjust burden. Now remember, the ANC believes that a 0.5% VAT increase ticks all of those boxes. And then they went on to say, the ANC and ActionSA both reaffirmed the necessity of identifying viable alternatives to the proposed VAT increase with a mutual commitment to avoid any such adjustment before 1 May 2025. Again, we'll try our best, but no guarantee. What's interesting for me about this statement is it could be the ANC doing the same politics, placating and placating, and just saying, we'll try our best. But remember, the ANC's line is, and has been, that VAT increase is the best way to do service delivery and to have a budget that helps ordinary South Africans. That's been their line from the beginning. This statement doesn't change that. It's just looking for alternatives abstractly. Because remember, if absolutely nothing happens, that VAT increase is happening.
Yeah.
Like, if they do nothing, the VAT increase is done.
Literally.
But the only thing I want to float for you now, just float it, is the fact that we know that there has been massive disagreements within the ANC top brass about this VAT increase at all. We know that some of the ANC's most powerful ministers were also blindsided by the 2% VAT increase, and then also read the room of South Africa and went, oh, nobody wants this, and pushed back against it. And we know that it was Ramaphosa's faction who has ultimately been pretty steadfast about this VAT increase. Now, yesterday on the show, we spoke about Mashatile's faction and voices saying we should kick the DA out of the GNU now as the ANC, and that Ramaphosa ultimately said we don't need to do that. They'll hang themselves. Let's just make these rules and let them walk. It'll be better for us. But we know that in the ANC, there are still a lot of people who don't want this VAT increase. There have also been off-the-record rumors that the finance minister has tried to resign twice and been told, no, we're not going to accept your resignation.
That's quite deep.
Because, let's be honest, the finance minister thinks VAT is the best solution. He doesn't want to go through this. He doesn't want to go through this over and over again of not getting what he wants and then trying to sell it and then fighting with all these people like SARS' Edward Kieswetter, who he was caught on a hot mic saying he's really angered him. Yeah. Finance minister's probably tired if these rumors are true. If these rumors are true, the finance minister is probably so over this. But there's a faction within the ANC that's probably certainly the Ramaphosa faction that ultimately gets its way, that wants this VAT increase. And there's another faction that doesn't. And so maybe there's a world in which there's no VAT increase because the ANC, remember a little while ago we said ActionSA's only two things they had to hope for was that the DA's court application wins to annul the VAT increase procedure that went through on the budget, or that the ANC was incredibly kind and dug ActionSA out of this hole. Maybe there's an ANC faction now within the African National Congress fighting to try and dodge this VAT increase. That's not the Ramaphosa faction? Maybe. And that might save ActionSA.
It's interesting to think about. I also wonder sometimes if maybe we should take the two issues out of the context that they're currently in, which is obviously intrinsically linked. But the faction, like Paul Mashatile is saying, that they want the DA out, this might just be the right moment for it. It might have nothing to do with the VAT at all.
Right, that's true. No, you're right, because a lot of members of the ANC didn't want the DA in the GNU in the first place. A lot of them have been hacked off with the DA resisting Bela and the NHI and Expropriation Act. So there is, you're right. It is possible that this is just some anti-DA and the GNU people taking their moment to say this is the time that we can kick them. That's true. But it would be extraordinary if another faction was able to be strong enough within the ANC to thwart Ramaphosa's people's VAT increase agenda at this late stage. It's the 10th of April. The 1st of May is in 3 weeks, and there's Freedom Day long weekend and Easter. They are not working.
Yeah, there's too many public holidays this month, man.
I don't mind it, but it would be fascinating if this is actually the huge plot twist of the month, which is that there's an ANC internal civil war that means that they actually take out the VAT increase.
Yeah.
It would be wild.
That's the end of it. That's the encoder. Hope you enjoyed listening to that. Hope it's building your mind and giving you some confidence. It's not all doom and gloom. When you start to feel like the world is falling apart and American warships are about to surround us because them fafos are constantly dumping threats, you know that Trump is playing around, really. He's being controlled by a group of people who want a controlled demolition of the United States. And so there's a campaign to make sure that while the big, bad, amazing country is resetting itself and humbling down, we see them as more superior than they actually are. And that is a strange thing. Maybe that is able to be conceived by a white brain that wants to really make an impression on some black brains. I cannot believe this. It's an amazing world, the things that people do. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.